What exactly is a tyrant? In Book 9 of the Republic, Plato reveals to us that this isn't just some kind of political nightmare, it's actually both a reflection and a creation of a soul that's thrown out of order in complete chaos. And ultimately, the tyrant is the most miserable of all the people in this society. So we can think of Book 9 of Plato's Republic as something of a psychological sequel to Book 8, right? So Book 8 describes the different forms of government and how they essentially devolve from a timocracy or an aristocracy into an oligarchy, democracy, and finally a tyranny. Now, once we get into Book 9, we get more of the specifics of what a tyranny looks like, both for the people, generally as a political establishment, but also for the individual tyrant, the person running the show. So Plato says that this is actually a direct consequence of the ideal city collapse. It's just a series of events that are essentially cause and effect, right? Those series of civilizations kind of logically follow after the other. And as you read the Republic, you see that he even describes kind of like the intergenerational attitudes that people will have toward themselves and toward their society, right? So especially as we get into an oligarchy, right? As you go from a society that is structured around nobility, ability, competency, honor, into one that is organized a little bit more according to wealth and possessions, we see the values of the people in that society shift from honoring ability more to honoring having possessions and the accumulation of wealth more. And that changes, in turn, changes society's entire structure. So here we see kind of a culmination of this disastrous spiral into tyranny, starting from Plato's ideal city, leading us here. There is this parallel, the whole analogy between the city and the soul of the individual, right? If the city is just and in order, the soul of the individual will also be just and in order. So there is a corresponding change in the soul of the individual as the city dissolves. So what is like the average person in a tyranny like? That's going to be the first question that Plato answers in Book 9 here. So he says that essentially in this case, the soul, right? We have the tripartite soul. There's the rational calculating part, the spirited emotional part, and the desiring part. In a tyranny, the desires have gotten control of everything else. They are the ones in charge. Because after that logical progression from aristocracy to oligarchy to democracy, right? Democracy is the immediately preceding type of society before we get to a tyranny. So in a democracy, Plato argues that people are able to try all kinds of things. They're exposed to all of life's pleasures. There was that quote about there's no distinction between necessary and unnecessary pleasures, or good pleasures and bad pleasures, beneficial and unbeneficial pleasures. It's all just pleasure, and it's all just good. So once the democratic people have gotten a taste for all of life's pleasures, they want all of them in greater quantity and in greater quality than they've ever been able to experience prior. So what this does is it feeds the desiring part of the soul. We just want and want and want. And that is what the typical citizen under a tyranny looks like. And he describes this to a kind of drunkenness. And he says, if you see people who are drunk wandering around, they have a similar kind of soul about them, right? They just want food, they want all kinds of things that we don't need to talk about on YouTube necessarily. So the privileging of the desiring part of the soul leads to an excess of desire, and a desire for things in the extreme, right? Extreme lust, extreme greed, extreme violence. And this kind of person in a tyranny becomes the rule instead of the exception. And what this does is it actually sets the stage for the individual tyrant, right? The actual tyrant, the ruler of everybody, to come to power, because this is the person with the greatest desires, the most extreme desires, with the strongest desiring part of their soul, right? They desire control of everything. And that is the person who will eventually take over. So, and Plato also says in this kind of arrangement of a city, it's basically a two-class society as opposed to the three, possibly four, depending on how you interpret it, the 3 or 4 class system of the aristocratic society, the perfect society, where you have like philosopher kings who are guardians, but then there's kind of like the guardian class that is separate from them, the auxiliary and the moneymakers. In the tyranny, they're really only slaves. People are slaves to themselves, and they are slaves to the actual tyrant who de facto rules over all of them as the head of the government. And that's the social organization of the city. Within the individual, the feelings and the rationality are slaves to desire. So we have a nice quote from the book here. It says, "Those desires that wake up in sleep when the rest of the soul, all that belongs to the calculating, tame, and ruling part of it slumbers, while the beastly and wild part, gorged with food or drink, is skittish, seeks to go and satisfy its dispositions. You know that in such a state it dares to do everything as though it were released from and rid of all shame and prudence." Plato then goes into what appears to be a sidetrack, right? Obviously through Socrates, but Socrates never goes on actual sidetracks, right? He's always just making his point the long way. He's setting up some other parts of the argument before the main argument itself gets there. So in this case, he talks about 3 kinds of pleasure that correspond to 3 different kinds of people, right? There are like these 3 different kinds of people, and they have these 3 different kinds of things that they like. Okay, the 3 people are lovers of wisdom. These are the philosophical people, the lovers of honor, and the lovers of gain. Okay? Surprise, surprise. Each one of these kinds of people sort of privileges a different part of the soul. And that determines their way of life. It determines the kinds of things that they take pleasure in. So, to start with, no surprise here, Plato's favorite. He thinks these are the best people, the fairest, the wisest. And those are the lovers of wisdom, or the philosophical people. And for these people, the rational part of the soul is the strongest, and they take their pleasure in learning. The second best too, right? We're doing these in hierarchical order here. The second best are the lovers of honor. And these are the people whose spirited part of their souls rules, right? They want to feel proud. They want others to look at them and maybe like feel jealousy or feel awe. And they want to feel proud of themselves. So in these people, the spirited or the emotional part of the soul is the strongest. And what they take pleasure in is being honored by others and achieving victory in combat and contests. And the final kind of person, this is the kind that corresponds to the people within a tyranny, and especially the tyrant themselves, and those are the lovers of gain. These are people for whom the desiring part of the soul is the strongest, and they seek money and goods. And they take their pleasure in obtaining money, goods, services, wealth, those kinds of things. And again, this is the kind of person that is the tyrant, that becomes a tyrant in a tyrannical society. So a quick little quote here from the book. "Therefore, of the 3 pleasures, the most pleasant would belong to that part of the soul with which we learn. And the man among us in whom this part rules has the most pleasant life. Then the pleasure of the lover of gain is in last place, as it seems." So again, no surprise here. Plato thinks the philosophical type of person who loves more than anything to learn things and learns anything without discriminating against one form of knowledge or another, they lead the best kind of life. The final arc of this chapter is really describing in detail what it is that makes the tyrant, the ruler, quite so miserable. And there are three different things, one of which we already discussed a little bit. But the first has to do with the tyrant's relationship to the people within their society. So Plato says that while the tyrant is technically in charge, he is something of a slave to the people that he is in charge of, to the citizens in the society. Because if the desiring part of the soul is enlarged for everybody within that society, and everybody is seeking some kind of gain, well, he's not the only one who wants to be the tyrant, right? So he has to both combat and supplicate the people who want to take the throne from him. Okay, so he's both in a position to have to constantly fight off enemies and rivals, as well as to appease the people who might not even aspire to be a rival for the tyranny, the chair, the throne, whatever it is that they're totally in charge of there. So that relationship between the tyrant and the people within the society is not a fun one to be in. They're also unable to enjoy their freedom because they spend so much time trying to hold on to their position of power within the society that they're actually unable to exercise freedom to do things that they might want to do, right? So any of the things that they might want to go and try, if they want to leave the city for some short period of time, they can't do that because they have to stay and clutch their power so tightly and constantly that they're unable to do that. And finally, the part that we have discussed the most is the relationship between a person's experience of life and the ordering of their soul, right? So in a tyrannical society, generally, the desiring part of the soul is in charge more than the others. It is the part that is most active, that causes the person to make decisions. And the tyrant, the person in charge, has the strongest and most vicious desires of all. So if a just soul, in which the rational calculating part is in charge, leads to a healthy, fair, moderate, temperate life, then when that balance is overturned, that results in an unpleasant, difficult, harmful, unsatisfactory kind of life. And that's the kind of life that the tyrant is resigned to because of their position. Final quote here for this. Therefore, the real tyrant is, in truth, a real slave to the greatest fawning and rivalry, and a flatterer of the most worthless men. And with his desires getting no kind of satisfaction, he shows that he is most in need of the things and poor in truth. Throughout his entire life, he is full of fear, overflowing with convulsions and pain. So tell me, what do you think? Does Plato's description of the different societies make sense? Are we living in any of those right now? Are we living in an aristocratic society, an oligarchy, a democracy, a tyranny? What makes you think that? And is there really like that natural progression from one form of society to another? And finally, are there people that you think resemble the tyrants that Plato describes today? Tell me about it. Till next time, we're coming out with Book 10. That'll be the last in this particular series. Remember to drop a like on the video if you learned something here today. Hit me with a subscribe if you want some more philosophical knowledge just from the books. And I will see you later.